Welcome back, everybody, to the Tentacles of Cuyahoga County. I am your host, the infamous ex-chief. And where are we at? August? I had it until I brought up something else on my phone. The week of August 26th. And I've got to report something astonishing happened. I had reported last week relative to Malley not appointing a special prosecutor relative to the George trial. The George family donating $30,000 to the campaign of Mike O'Malley. And I'd like to think that Mike O'Malley heard me on my channel here and decided that it was the best thing to do was appoint a special counsel. He did. And I would like to take credit for it, even though I don't think it was me. But other mainstream media actually did report on it. As I stated, I was astonished and surprised. Other mainstream media actually spoke very badly and ill of Mike O'Malley's decision. And I think he probably heard that message, became frightened. And Channel 3 asked him for a comment, and his office is always usually the first ones to comment on anything. Anything to do with the prosecutor's office, usually they love to comment. And they abstained from commenting on that, so that led me to believe that he probably did take that story from Channel 3 to heart. So, some housekeeping again. If you're subscribed, thank you for subscribing. If you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. Make sure you hit the like button. That helps the algorithms of YouTube. I've really went down a large rabbit hole of YouTube, just SEO technology. I'm trying to learn and get how to perform this better myself. And it's quite the conundrum rabbit hole that I've gone down because there's a lot to it. But I am seeing a lot of things spike, which reminds me, we are now over 100,000 views on this channel. We're at like 100,600 if I remember correctly. Hang on. Yes, 100,613 views is where we are. Amazing. Again, since March, this channel's here, and I owe everybody out there a great round of applause. Thank you for tuning in once a week to the ambassador of good law enforcement and the ambassador of holding certain government agencies accountable. We were actually up to 1845 subscribers. 1,845 subscribers. Awesome. So, again, going back to my housekeeping first. I keep going all over the place. Housekeeping, all right. So, please hit like. If you're subscribed already, thank you. If you're not, please consider doing so. Make certain you do hit the like button whether you want to subscribe or not. Feel free to donate me a cup of coffee by pressing there. If not, that's totally fine. Also, you're still going to get it free because we're now monetized. And it's important you watch the ads. It mitigates the cost and allows me to fill my pockets full of cash. So, the ads update, and there must be some, and maybe somebody knows more than I do. Feel free to leave comments below. So, I had some updated reports from viewers telling me their ads, and there was a comment from one of my viewers that was, I have to find it. All right, so there was a comment from one of my viewers talking about getting ads from West Marine, and I had no idea what that was. I had to Google it. Apparently, that's some sort of phishing department store. I don't know. I don't even know what it is. It's some website that you can get some sort of phishing supplies from. And then I also got some messages relative to ads from Amazon, and we're still on manscaping. But I honestly think it's the algorithm of YouTube, folks, and I think it's whatever you're saying next to your phone. Hey, I want to buy that manscaping product, and I think your phone's picking it up, and it's getting into YouTube, and those are the ads that you're seeing on the channel. I don't think that there's any rhyme and reason. I don't think that I have any control over it. I think YouTube somehow knows what you're looking at or what you're thinking about getting. And that's how the ads are coming. And I have no idea what just happened. My screen just completely flashed white on both screens, which is sort of odd. So I don't know. Hopefully I'm still recording. So we're going to get into... I had a viewer, a very close viewer, asked me to look at the... there was a Hudson case that, honestly, it was a cold case that was just recently solved. I put in a huge amount of public records requests all over the place because there was ties all over the place. I haven't gotten a lot back. I'm already getting some pushback from BCI, which is apparently involved here as of late, but I'll get more in depth to that in a later segment here. We're going to be discussing something that it's been near and dear to my heart, that I keep bringing up, and that's the perception of society's role on law enforcement. And we're gonna take a bit of a deep dive into it. I've done quite a bit of due diligence into this, and I'm gonna bring up a statistic actually from an organization called Cato, the Cato Institute. And I actually was unfamiliar with them up until this point, but apparently they are a prominent libertarian think tank. At least that's what they advertise themselves to be. If anybody's familiar with them, feel free to leave comments below. Let me know, or hit me up. Oh, I forgot all about that. Make sure, if you need to email me, drop in the email address here. If you would rather speak to me securely via Signal, feel free to scan the QR codes here. I will put those up in post-production. That way you guys can email or message me. And again, if there's anything that anybody wants me to look at, please feel free to email or message me. Again, I've got a couple of things I'm working on already, just waiting on public records requests to come back. And I think I told you I already filed my first claim with the Ohio Court of Claims, which is one of their functions is actually public records requests. You can actually go to any county court system and file a writ of mandamus, but you can also file a public records complaint through the Ohio Court of Claims. And because my complaint was about Cuyahoga County, I didn't see there anything good coming for me filing a writ of mandamus in the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court. So I chose to file through the Ohio Court. So we'll see what happens there. It was awarded already to a special master. And I looked the attorney up. He looks like he's a civil rights attorney in Columbus, so hoping he doesn't violate my civil rights. So I'm going to shut down this segment with my hook. Nearly half of Americans, 49%, and again, this is going back to the Cato. They did a survey. So according to Cato, nearly half of Americans, 49%, believe that most police officers think they are above the law. And this perception is even more pronounced among African Americans and Hispanics, with 61% of each group holding this belief. This statistic highlights a significant trust gap between law enforcement and certain communities, which could have a profound implication for public confidence in policing and community relations. And again, this is something that I keep bringing back to you guys, and this is where I'm hoping this channel bridges that gap between public perception and what police are doing. And with that hook, I'll see you on the next segment. Welcome back, everybody, to the second segment on episode 22. I just wanted to drop this into this segment. There was an incident that had occurred in East Canton recently, which East Canton, not to be confused with Canton. East Canton is a small village in between Minerva and Canton on Route 30. There was an incident that originally occurred on June 24th. I'm going to drop that. This is a piece from Channel 19 when that occurred. And then directly afterwards, I'm going to drop something that just occurred last week. And I thought it was interesting. Here it is.
Police officer shot at multiple times during a pursuit. Thanks for joining us now at 3. I'm Nicole Versansky. So that suspect then led several agencies on a high-speed chase, ultimately crashing his motorcycle and running away. 19's Brittany Weir joining us live now with the terrifying details. Brittany.
It was a scary morning for East Canton police officer Andrea Mixon. She was initiating a traffic stop right here at the corner of Nassau and Wood Street. And then moments later, just 100 yards down the road, she heard several gunshots.
A motorcycle appeared. The guy had a gun in his hand. She could see him. It was just like a block away.
East Canton Police Chief Thomas Heinerman is talking about the frightening moments before one of his officers was shot at Sunday morning.
She got in her cruiser, approached him, and then he took off northbound on 44.
Officer Andrea Mixon pursued the suspect, Edward Irwin III, almost into Louisville, and that is when Irwin fired his weapon again.
And during that pursuit, he turned around and fired 2 more shots at her.
Thankfully, Officer Mixon wasn't hit by any of the bullets. She continued the chase through East Canton, along with officers from Louisville, Hartville, and deputies from Stark County Sheriff's Office. Eventually, Irwin lost control of his motorcycle on South Wood Street and started to run away.
We're real fortunate that no bullets hit anybody. Nobody was shot. The officers, everybody was okay, even the suspect.
And Irwin was charged with felonious assault, fleeing and eluding, and felony possession of drugs. After being treated at the hospital, he was taken to the Stark County Jail. But this isn't Irwin's first time running in with police. Coming up at 5, I'll share his lengthy criminal history. In East Canton, Brittany Weir, 19 News.
Now to a story you'll see on just one station. A police officer shocks local city council members by interrupting a meeting and suddenly resigning. Brittany Weir shares why she made this abrupt decision.
Andrea Mixon was a police officer for the East Canton Police Department. She started working for the department briefly in 2022 and then rejoined again back in April. In June, she initiated a traffic stop that then led to a police chase, and the suspect ended up firing multiple shots at her. On Monday, Mixon walked into an East Canton City Council meeting where she handed in her resignation.
I'm formally resigning right now.
You just watched a frustrated East Canton police officer suddenly resign. It happened this past Monday in front of City Council. It's a decision Andrea Mixon didn't make lightly.
We had a lot of things that were needing to be worked out, and I don't believe that they were being looked at fast enough.
Mixon says some of those things included being short-staffed, the number of hours officers worked, and their pay.
Filling in for the shifts that we don't have covered, and the low pay. I mean, I was only working for $20 an hour in that area.
Mixon says one of the key things that played a major factor in her decision to resign is how she was treated after she was shot at during a police chase back in June.
People tend to think that East Canton's this Mayberry area. You know, it's a small village. Nothing ever happens there. And that's the number one concern for me, is these small towns that they believe that nothing is going to happen. And it's just when it's going to happen.
According to Mixon, she continued to work her shift minutes after being shot at. She worked until 12 p.m. the next day and says the department never offered her time off.
When you particularly think about critical incidences of those natures, majority of departments do have a process after the fact. You know, if it's an officer involved shooting, or if it's something that is very critical, you have a debriefing. You talk about it with your higher ups. Sometimes they send a chaplain in. But no, I was never offered those things.
Mixon says she would love to get back into law enforcement because it is a passion of hers. However, she wants to continue to keep advocating for her and her fellow first responders' mental health. We reached out to the mayor of East Canton, and he says they are working on making improvements within the department, and they never want to see an officer go. Reporting, Brittany Weir, 19 News.
So welcome back, everybody, to this segment here. And as I had told you, I had dropped the newsreel relative to the East Canton officer, and I had originally intended to actually go into more in depth with that, but things quickly change in a rapid succession rate here on the show, and I've actually been in touch with the officer because I actually wanted to hear her point of the view, because it resounds with a lot of the things that this channel is talking about and has been talking about, even relative to earlier interviews with Doug Miller, even the show that I was doing on the Lakemore officer involved shooting. Some of the topics and things that I was discussing in those episodes are relevant to her story, and I wanted you to hear firsthand from her. So hopefully we're going to be speaking to her soon, and so I'm not going to go too much into depth on the newsreels that are in the segment, but I still wanted to drop them and leave them in here. That way you had an idea of what we would be discussing here in a show coming up shortly. All right, so getting back to, I guess what I'm coining as attempting to bridge the gap between public perception and what officers do. And when I say what officers do, I'm saying the things that they're supposed to be doing, their job. And again, I am the ambassador of good officers. So when they're doing their job, when they're performing, and this is something as chief, I made certain when the officers were doing and performing their job, I was going to back them 115%. All right. And so I feel this is sort of what my mission here to continue to do is support officers when they are doing something good. So understanding law enforcement practices is pretty crucial in today's society due to their significant impact on public safety. You know, you've got community trust, social justice. Law enforcement agencies play a vital role in maintaining order, protecting citizens, and ensuring justice. However, the methods and practices they employ are under increasing scrutiny and demand for reform, making it essential to comprehend their operations and challenges. And this is something, again, that I keep talking about in most of these episodes. And these are the things that I'm attempting to bridge. So this is the part of the segment that I'm referring to. And you have to remember my formal education and background is that of corporate communication. And a lot of speaking, branding, if you will. So I laid out an outline for this show because I wanted to make sure that I hit all of the points that I intended on hitting. And I know that I've had some Joe Rogan-y style of shows before, and I appreciate the impromptu-ness of that. but I also appreciate the ability to put an outline together and present it to you guys, and that's what I'm doing here on this segment, at least. So again, I call this the presentation of the problem or challenge, and that is law enforcement agencies face several common misconceptions and challenges that impact their ability to maintain public trust and essentially effectively serve their communities. Understanding these issues is crucial for emphasizing the importance of transparency and accountability within law enforcement. So you have to understand what some of the common misconceptions are, and I'm sure you do. I mean, you hear it all the day, every day on news, especially Northeast Ohio news. So the number one, I have misunderstanding of police roles. Many people have misconceptions about what police officers can and cannot do, often expecting them to solve all community problems, which is beyond their legal and practical capacity. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I would go on a call, especially like any type of, and when I say domestic call, I'm not necessarily talking about the legal criminal word domestic, meaning a battery or assault between two parties that live together or are related. When I say domestic, I just mean in a home setting. So it could be an argument between mother and child, or it could be between spouses, or boyfriend, girlfriend, 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 boyfriend, boyfriend, whatever it might be. But you were called in to a situation that had been stewing for the better part of 5, 10, 20 years, and in 10 minutes while you're there, you're expected to solve all of their issues. And it doesn't happen that way. And unfortunately, police, that's not the capability of police. A lot of people have made it more warmy and fuzzy for the role of law enforcement, but break down the word law enforcement. Okay, law enforcement enforces laws. They're not the feelings police. They're not sociologists. They're not psychologists. All right, and again, that's one of the things that people are expecting of them. And again, I state this as a popular misconception. So number two, perception of transparency. A significant portion of the public believe that law enforcement lacks transparency, which can lead to mistrust and skepticism about police action decisions. And I think a lot of agencies have attempted to bridge that gap with the body-worn camera system. And I was extremely proud in East Cleveland to get one of the most state-of-the-art systems that was out there at the time. It probably still is one of the most advanced systems. It was essentially what it was a cell phone. And this cell phone was transmitting and uploading in real time. And supervisors or anybody, even in live events, could pull up what was happening. And there was a lot of fail-safes. If you pulled your firearm, it triggered and made sure that you were already recording. It was also connected to the CAD system. So if you were dispatched to a call, whenever you got to a certain distance of the call, I can't remember what we had chosen, maybe 500 to 1,000 feet of that address, it would automatically trigger when you were on, dispatch for calls. If you activated your lights and or siren on the car, it would activate. So there were a lot of fail-safes. And again, this goes back to number two. A lot of people think that it's an intentional act. A lot of times officers, they get into situations and they forget to activate their body-worn camera. It does happen. There are officers who do it on purpose. And, administratively, you attempt to deal with those officers when possible. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I would get a call from Channel 19 relative to some sort of incident that happened in East Cleveland, and all I wanted was to show Channel 19 and to show the world that this officer did nothing wrong, only to find they didn't activate their body camera. It does happen. Moving on. Number 3, accountability. There's a common belief that police officers are not held accountable for their actions. This perception can be exasperated by high-profile cases of misconduct and the belief that the internal investigations are biased. I'll just leave that where it's at. I can't tell you how many times I look for, in the news, similar things officers get charged criminally for that any other person might get charged for, and the automatic belief is that the officer is somehow getting it easier, when in most cases the officer gets it much more than anybody else would be. I mean, you look at even just some of the cases relative to the East Cleveland case, the cases where officers have been sent to prison. If it was anybody ordinary, they would have not been sent to prison. So I find this particular misconception extremely disheartening. Every time I hear or see a comment people leave after a news article relative to an officer who they feel have gotten some sort of preferential treatment. And I'm not saying that it may not happen. It may happen. But often when I'm reading and reviewing what's happening, the officer is getting it 10 times worse than had anybody else done it. Had the post office worker done it. Had the guy from Wendy's done it. The girl that works at Mark's. Had she done something, the officer is getting it 10 times worse. So let's talk about some challenges faced by law enforcement. I've got number 1, cultural and structural barriers. Law enforcement agencies often have deeply ingrained cultures that resist change. This includes a, quote, code of silence, unquote, among officers, which can hinder accountability and transparency efforts. There is. And it's something, again, that I believe has come a long way since I started in law enforcement in 19, and I don't know what year. It was either 95 or 96, all right? So in those times, a lot of things have changed as far as the cultural barrier. You know, it used to be a man's job for the longest time. And I recall very many issues going through law enforcement relative to that for a long time. And I just want to stop right there. I mean, especially when I got to East Cleveland, there were... I full-heartedly believe females are totally capable of performing this job, and in most cases, on a lot of the female officers that I worked with, I would rather have them breaching or going through a door with me than anybody else. So you talk about the code of silence, and I don't think it's necessarily with any law enforcement or just specific to law enforcement, but you have to look at it. It's specific to any job. I mean, anybody that's tight, wherever you work, you have a work group, and you guys are probably tight. And if something were to happen, you probably would back your favorite coworker, your favorite work wife, work husband. You would back them. And where it is dangerous in law enforcement is because the amount of power and responsibility law enforcement have, the code of silence is obviously a lot more dramatic than most jobs. So number 2, resistance to oversight. Police unions and some officers may resist external oversight and accountability measures, viewing them as threats rather than opportunities for improvement. And I need to back up because I probably should have prefaced that these things are for the officers. I mean, you the public can hear it, obviously, but these statements are for the officers. I'm hoping that it causes officers that watch this specific show, this channel, this segment, to maybe think in their mind what I'm talking about. So, unions. I talk about it all the time. And I was actually, for several years, was head of the union. I refer to it as the worthless FOP. I don't mean to disparage anybody that's union, but let's face it. Unions protect the worst and the least contributing member of any organization. It used to infuriate me that I was getting paid the same amount of this person was getting paid, and I was doing all of the work, and they weren't. They weren't contributing whatsoever, but they got the same pay. And that's what the police union protects. Now, I don't know how to change it, because policing is a different animal. I think that unions are required in the policing world, only because a police officer may have to take action one day against a city council person or a mayor. And these are people that, or even a police chief. And these are people that have direct ability to affect your job when whether you're still employed. So if I catch a city council person driving intoxicated and I don't have a union to back me, that city council person can have me terminated and I would have no recourse. And all I'm doing is my job. So this is where it's tough for me, because I actually don't agree or believe mostly in unions, but the police world, only because they, again, unions, in my opinion, support the people that are doing the least amount of work. But in law enforcement, you have to have them. You have to have that union. Number 3 is legal and policy constraints. Collective bargaining agreements and certain state laws can impede the implementation of accountability measures, making it difficult for departments to discipline officers effectively. And again, this goes back to my disdain of unions. There were times as an administrator coming up, even just a sergeant, detective bureau commander, captain, police chief were some of the ranks that I held. And I knew that an officer or a detective did something inappropriate, and I would attempt to discipline them. And because of the union, because of the collective bargaining agreement, I was hindered in doing so. Number 4 is public scrutiny and media pressure. This is what I talk about a lot. The media plays a significant role in shaping public perception of law enforcement. However, media coverage can sometimes be biased or sensationalized, leading to public distrust. So the importance of transparency and accountability. Let's talk about building public trust. Transparency and accountability are essential for building and maintaining public trust. When law enforcement agencies operate transparently, they allow the public to understand and evaluate their actions, which foster confidence and trust. I prided myself as chief for being a very open and transparent person, even with the media. I don't think any chief prior to me allowed the amount of transparency. If you had a question about a call, an investigation, something an officer did, I did everything in my power to make it as transparent as possible. Preventing misconduct. Accountability mechanisms such as external oversight and independent investigations help prevent abuse of power and misconduct by ensuring that officers are held responsible for their actions. The only thing that I caution is the way, and I realize after I wrote this, I'm speaking it, I don't necessarily agree with, like Cleveland has the oversight committees, Akron, and they're all lay people. I believe in having external oversight, But that external oversight should be prior law enforcement, in my opinion. It's very hard for someone who hasn't done the job, hasn't performed the job, doesn't know the job, to be able to be over you. So, I mean, whatever you do here that you're watching, whatever your job is, how would you feel if you're a banker and a clerk from Mark's is over you telling you how to perform your job? It's not going to do well. And that's what I mean relative to the civilian oversight committees that like Akron and Cleveland are having at this point. Improving police-community relations. Transparent practices and accountability measures can improve relations between police and their communities they serve, leading to more effective and community-oriented policing. Something I strive very highly for in East Cleveland. I had an excellent pool of community policing officers. Enhancing professional standards, implementing systems for the officer certification and decertification ensure that law enforcement personnel meet professional standards, thereby promoting integrity and accountability. I said it before, there was a large attack initially in the East Cleveland Police Department. The party eventually went on to other police departments, but the argument was relative to continuing training. But the issue was, where the argument was flawed is this person took it up against East Cleveland when it was OPATA, Ohio Peace Officer Training Association, that this person had the issue with. It was the way that OPATA was administering the advanced training. It was OPATA's way of documenting how that training was being conducted. It was OPATA that was prescribing the manner that training was being conducted, and this person took offense to it, but took it out on East Cleveland instead of OPATA. Things have changed up to this point, where there's a lot more transparency now relative to the training certification of officers. You can now go on OPATA's website and actually search for any officer in the state of Ohio and see if they are in compliance and what type of training that they have received, as long as it's OPATA training. There is training outside of OPATA, folks. Unfortunately, that's not shown on the OPATA website for training. So let's talk about development. Law enforcement practices significantly impact both officers and the communities they serve. Here I'm going to explore some specific practices and their implications. And we briefly talked about community policing as a strategy that emphasizes building relationships between the police and the community members, between the police and community members to solve problems and enhance public safety. This approach involves partnerships and engagement, officers working closely with community members, local organizations, and other stakeholders to address issues beyond just crime, such as social disorder and fear of crime. We were sort of partnered with church groups, Salvation Army. There were outside entities and organizations that we were partnered with in attempts to do this. So proactive problem solving. Instead of merely responding to incidents, community policing encouraged officers to identify and address the root cause of the problems. This often involves engaging with community members to understand their concerns and to develop solutions. Impact on the officers and community. For officers, this approach can lead to increased job satisfaction as they see tangible results from their efforts. For communities, it can enhance trust and cooperation with law enforcement, leading to improved safety and quality of life. So this is the big one we're going to talk about here: de-escalation and crisis intervention. I believe Ohio calls it CRT, Crisis Response Team, I think. But this has been a big topic for mental health issues. Law enforcement, again, are being taxed with things that they normally don't have to deal with, and it's become more of a role now in law enforcement to deal with mental health issues. And not all de-escalation has to deal with mental health, but that's relative to the crisis intervention part of that. But so we're going to talk about de-escalation and crisis intervention. De-escalation techniques and crisis intervention strategies are critical in law enforcement to manage situations involving individuals in crisis, particularly those with mental health issues. These practices include training and implementation. Officers are trained to use communication and negotiation skills to diffuse potentially volatile situations without resorting to force. This training often includes understanding mental health issues and recognizing signs of distress. And this is where I was talking about. So I referred to, I misspoke. It's CIT, Crisis Intervention Teams. CIT, specialized units within police departments focus on responding to incidents involving mental health crisis. These teams often work in collaboration with mental health professionals to provide appropriate responses and referrals. Now, where the issue is, even in the city of East Cleveland, CIT is awesome. Having teams respond is awesome if your agency is big enough. But most agencies, honestly, in Ohio, aren't big enough to have a dedicated team like this. So it's important to train. I was actually just talking to an officer, unrelated subject, relative to SWAT, and how I prided myself in East Cleveland by attempting to make certain that every platoon at least had a SWAT operator. That was I attempted to make certain that happened. And the same thing here. You send out officers to training. It's sometimes impossible to have a team in smaller agencies. Like the best solution would be, so send out officers and make certain that they're on every shift. That would be my solution. Impact. Effective de-escalation can reduce the likelihood of use of force incidents, thereby minimizing harm to both officers and civilians. It can also improve public perception of the police as protectors rather than enforcers. De-escalation is critical. I used to pride myself on the fact that if I was able to take a volatile situation, a highly agitated situation, and not lay hands on someone, I was proud. And if I wasn't able to, I personally would go back often and reflect. Often I would review body cameras or in-car cameras prior to body cameras. And I would look at the situation and see if there was any way that I possibly could have handled that any differently. Just like a sports person would go back and look at the filming of a play, that's what I did. I would go back and say, you know what? I had to lay hands on this person. Is there anything else? Is there anything that I could have done differently so that the next time I might be able to perform better? This is part of de-escalation. Being able to use your mouth and talk people down. One of my ex-partners, I only had primarily two partners in East Cleveland for any significant amount of time. 5 years each. I had one partner, 5 years, another partner, 5 years when I was on the road. One of my partners had a saying that I still sticks with me today. Okay, God gave you one mouth and 2 ears for a reason. And that's why it's important in law enforcement relative to de-escalation. Hearing what's happening, getting that person to hear what you're saying, attempting to lower and diffuse the situation so that you can have a dialogue rather than force. So let's talk about use of technology and data. The integration of technology and data analytics in policing has transformed how law enforcement agencies operate. Data-driven policing. Agents use data to identify crime trends, allocate resources effectively, and develop strategies to prevent crime. This approach can enhance transparency and accountability by providing evidence-based insights into police activities. I recall when I was in the Detective Bureau, and I'm sure other places were doing it at that time, but it just became largely apparent to me. I would go through, I remember specifically we were having a rash of carjacking, and this is when carjacking just even came about for an activity to be done. It was new. It was a new idea by the criminals to do carjacking. And we started to have a rash of it in the city. 20, 30, 40. And I went through and took every address and I would pen plot it on a map. And after a while, we were able to ascertain, okay, well, this is happening in this section of the city. It's happening at this time of day, more prominently. Well, now they have computers that do this for you. So that's what I was referring to as part of the data-driven policing. So we're going to talk about body-worn cameras. We talked about it, but these devices are used to increase transparency and accountability. They can provide objective evidence in disputes and help build community trust by demonstrating a commitment to transparency. So the impact, while technology can improve efficiency and accountability, it also raises concern about privacy and the potential for misuse. Balancing these factors is crucial for maintaining public trust. Now, I see a lot of departments are moving towards the officers requiring, and I think it's actually some of the state laws in certain areas now, where officers are required to advise you, hey, I am audio and video recording you. Some departments even go through and give the person that's being spoken to the ability to waive out. I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea or not. Having someone say, hey, I don't want to be recorded. But it is no fun. It does suck in certain aspects. It is public record. So if you have interaction with a police officer and they are recording you, the entire world can see what's happening through a public records request. So have that in mind here, folks. So let's talk about the challenges and consideration. Despite the benefits, law enforcement practices face several challenges. Mistrust and historical tensions, historical and ongoing issues such as racial discrimination and use of force incidents have led to mistrust between communities and police. Addressing these issues requires acknowledging past injustices and actively working to rebuild trust. As an administrator, own when the agency makes an error. I talk about the Don Pasella case in Parma. Had that happened in the East Cleveland, I realize this has nothing to do with race or what I was just specifically speaking about, but it has to do with acknowledging past injustices and actively working to rebuild that trust. So had I been the chief of Parma, I would have said, hey, we dropped the ball. It wasn't me specifically. I may not have been working at the time, but someone dropped the ball, and I'm going to do what I can to make it right. Firm believer in that. Acknowledge. Training and resources. Adequate training. Keep saying this, people can't harp on it enough. Adequate training in areas like cultural competency, implicit bias, and community engagement is essential for effective policing. However, many departments face resources constraints that limit their ability to implement comprehensive training programs. I talk about OPATA, and BCI is part of OPATA, part of the Attorney General's office. It falls under the umbrella. All of these agencies, they're separate. So you have BCI, okay, you have OPATA, Ohio Peace Officer Training Association. They fall under the Ohio Attorney General. So while I do like BCI, OPATA can be horrible. In Ohio, they raised all of these training requirements on officers, but they gave no ability for the individual jurisdiction to figure out how to pay for it. Now, it's a dual sword, because in general, agencies have been declining on training. Maybe this is OPATA's way of trying to fight that. I don't know. But it was unfair how it was implemented. In Ohio, hey, guess what? Now you have your standards were here for training. Now your standards are here, and guess what? We're not going to help you figure out how to pay for those standards. Balancing enforcement and community relations. Officers must balance their roles as enforcers of law with being community partners. This dual role can be challenging, especially in communities with high crime rates or significant distrust of law enforcement. The interesting thing is, in East Cleveland, there is this perception, mostly because of the media and Michael Malley, that the residents of East Cleveland do not like their police. And I would tell you, you could go out and survey for yourself, and out of 10 actual residents, I'm not talking about people who don't live in East Cleveland, I'm talking about actual residents, you could go ask 10 of them, and I would be extremely astonished and buy you coffee for a week if 9 out of 10, previously, I don't know what's happening now. When I was chief, let me put that caveat. When I was chief, 9 out of 10 of those residents are going to tell you that the police are doing a great and excellent job protecting them, or at least what we could do. They recognized our challenge of a shortage of manpower and money, but they still felt that we were doing everything in our power to protect them. And that's why I still, even to this day, love and miss my East Cleveland residents. And I appreciate those who continue to reach out to me and talk to me. So let's talk about key moment. A compelling case study that highlights the effectiveness of law enforcement practices is the implementation of evidence-based policing strategies. This approach has shown significant promise in enhancing the effectiveness of policing by using data and scientific research to inform decision-making processes. Evidence-based policing focuses on targeting hotspots. Talked about it before. Hot people and hot times. I think I mentioned the hotspots and the hot times previously. Didn't talk about the hot people. But yes, that's to reduce crime effectively. So it's evidence-based policing in action. Proactive policing. Number one, proactive policing. This strategy involves using crime analysts to identify areas, hotspots, and times with high crime rates, as well as individuals, hot people, who are more likely to commit crimes. By focusing resources on these identified areas and individuals, police forces can significantly reduce crime rates. This approach is supported by research indicating that a small percentage of offenders are responsible for a large proportion of crime. For instance, it is estimated, and this is from an article from policeone.com, it is estimated that 3 to 5% of the population commits 50 to 60% of the crime. Let me say it one more time. According to policeone.com, which is if you don't know, policeone.com is a very reputable police-oriented publication. It is estimated that 3 to 5%, think about this, 3 to 5% of the population commits 50 to 60% of the crime. In East Cleveland, I was extremely proud. I had reduced violent crime, and I still wish I had access to my data. I want to say at one point we had reduced violent crime by 85%. 85%. And there was a lot of kickback. There was a lot of people that were upset. Not East Cleveland residents, but throughout the county. People were upset with how we were doing it, and we were performing it this way. I was getting data relative to hotspots in the city. We were enforcing or proactively in those areas. And in doing so, we would get into a lot of police chases, a lot of pursuits. And I think that there were multiple reasons. One, criminals are just going to pursue generally. They're not going to stop for police in general. But I think the higher effect was that no one else in the county, especially Cleveland that we bordered, Cleveland almost didn't pursue for anything. You could do anything and nobody would pursue. And I couldn't tell you the amount of arrests that we had. You would watch the body camera and the suspect literally would say, I didn't know that you could chase me. Or they would say, hey, you're not allowed to chase me. And these are things that have been driven into the society's head for that entire time and continues to this day. Continues to this day that people in the Cleveland area believe that police cannot pursue them. And for the most part, they can't. Only because of individual agencies within Cuyahoga County, individual venues, and individual cities that have policies that restrict the officers from pursuing. Now, I mean, you could do we could do a whole week's show on pursuits, and yes, there's a liability. There's there's a lot of factors to it going both ways. But with this proactive policing, East Cleveland had reduced at least by 85%, and I want to say it was even higher at certain points. But anyways, that was for my point of number one. So let's talk about randomized controlled trials. They call them RCTs. These are evidence-based policing, often employs RCTs, randomized control trials, to evaluate the effectiveness of different policing strategies. These trials are considered the gold standard in scientific researching, allowing for a rigorous comparison between new interventions and traditional practices. By continually assessing and analyzing data, police departments can refine their strategies to ensure that they are as effective as possible. So you're taking that data that you worked with, you're then the data that you're able to identify. You go out there and you perform your job. You proactively patrol, and then you take that data and you bring it back home and you say, did we do well with this? Did we not do well with this? What could we have done better? And that's what I'm talking about. So let's talk about number 3, the integration with technology. The use of technology in evidence-based policing has also proven effective. For example, police departments use software to track and analyze crime data, conduct surveillance, and collaborate with probation and parole officers. This technological integration helps in identifying and monitoring individuals at risk of offending, thereby preventing potential crimes before they occur. Think about that. Think about the ability to prevent a crime, because that's what proactive policing is all about. Back when I came up in the academy, they had the Kansas City experiment. And the premise that came out of the Kansas City experiment was that if officers allowed graffiti to grow up, one day you let graffiti grow up. The next day you have unwanteds standing in front of the graffiti. The next day, those unwanteds are now selling drugs and narcotics. The next day, there's prostitutes. So the next day, you have shootings, robberies, homicides, rapes. So the whole premise is to nip it in the bud. Nip it before the graffiti goes up in the way that the Kansas City experiment talked about. And we're still utilizing this today in law enforcement. If you're able to proactively go out there and actually prevent crime before it occurs, that is when you're winning in law enforcement. So the implementation of evidence-based policing has demonstrated that when law enforcement agencies rely on data-driven strategies, they significantly enhance their crime prevention efforts. This approach not only improves the efficiency of police operations, but also fosters better community relations by focusing on areas and individuals that truly require attention, rather than relying on random patrols. So, we were referred to up the hill, Forest Hills area. We often would refer to that as East Cleveland Heights, jokingly, because it bordered Cleveland Heights. And the amount of calls to service up there were practically nil. You might go through, once in a while, there might be a crime spree up there, maybe broken in cars, maybe people breaking into houses. Very sporadically, very rare. So is it important for officers to be up there? Yes, it's still important to go up and show a presence up there. But should we have 4 officers up there and nobody on Page and Wymore? Well, at the time, Page and Wymore were active. Now they've been totally leveled. So probably bad examples currently. But Page and Wymore were extremely hot spots when I was on the road in East Cleveland. So was it more effective to have officers on Page and Wymore, or was it more effective to have officers up in East Cleveland Heights? So I'm going to refer to this section as call to action. All right, my call to action is for you. I need you to leave your questions and comments. We keep talking about this. All right, everybody messages me, but nobody else. The issue is when you message me directly, nobody else sees your comments or your messages or your suggestions. So please, even if you have to make a fake YouTube account, make a fake YouTube account. Come back and leave a comment. All right? Because everybody wants to hear what you have to say. The whole point, I can't say the whole point. One of the large points of this channel is to get some interaction with people. Even if you come into the channel and call me a bootlicker, come in and call me a bootlicker. All right? Let's get some interaction. I want the dialogue. That's what I want, folks. Leave me your dialogue. So I'm going to be the first to ask the question. I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to pin it when this video is done. So anyways, folks, we're at a wrap for this episode. And again, I've had conversation with the officer from East Canton, and I'm hoping that we're able to get that up for you very shortly. Don't forget, Monday is Labor Day, and I hope everybody has a great weekend, an extra long weekend. Have a great, great Labor Day, folks. We'll see you next week.